Picture this. Somebody sits down at a keyboard, opens a chat window with an artificial intelligence, and types a single question. Who really built the Sphinx? No pharaoh's name in the prompt, no textbook citation, just the question itself. And within seconds, the machine starts talking about limestone, about rainfall, about a face that might not match the body it sits on. For a moment it feels like the ground under one of the world's oldest monuments has shifted. But before you get swept up in that feeling, here is the honest truth you deserve to hear right at the start of this video. An AI chatbot is not an oracle. It is not a hidden database of secret history waiting to be unlocked. It is a language model, trained on human writing, human arguments, and yes, human speculation, including plenty of speculation that sounds scientific, but is not accepted by the archaeologists and geologists who actually study this monument for a living. So this video is going to do something a little different than most of the videos you have probably seen about this topic. It is going to walk you through the real debate about the Sphinx's age, the real scientist behind the controversial water erosion theory, what happens when you actually put that question to an AI system, and why you should be skeptical any time a video tells you a chatbot has just overturned everything historians believe. Because the truth here is stranger and more interesting than the myth, and it does not require bending the facts to keep your attention. Let's start with the monument itself, because it deserves to be understood on its own terms before anyone brings algorithms into the conversation. The Great Sphinx sits on the Giza Plateau, just outside modern Cairo, a colossal limestone figure with the body of a reclining lion and the head of a man, carved directly from the bedrock of the plateau, and then built up further with quarried blocks around its lower body. It is roughly 73 meters long and about 20 meters tall, which makes it one of the largest single stone sculptures on Earth. For well over a century, the mainstream Egyptological position has been that the Sphinx was carved during the reign of the pharaoh Khafra, who ruled during Egypt's 4th dynasty, somewhere around the 25th century BCE. That dating rests on a genuine body of evidence. There is a causeway connecting the Sphinx enclosure to Khafra's pyramid and to his valley temple. There is stylistic evidence linking the face of the Sphinx to other statues confidently identified as Khafra. Tool marks in the enclosure are consistent with Old Kingdom quarrying techniques. And there is a broader context, an entire necropolis of tombs, temples, and administrative structures from the same era clustered around the Sphinx, all pointing to the same historical moment. This is not a flimsy theory propped up by tradition alone. It is a conclusion built from architecture, inscriptions, and comparative art history, refined by generations of excavation. But here is where the story gets genuinely interesting, and where I want to give credit to a real scientist instead of a machine. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, a geologist named Robert Shark, who taught at Boston University, examined the erosion patterns on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, the deep trench that surrounds the statue's body. He argued that the vertical, undulating grooves cut into that limestone looked less like the horizontal sandblasting you would expect from thousands of years of desert wind, and more like the pattern left by prolonged, heavy rainfall running down a rock face over a very long time. Since the Giza Plateau has been arid for most of the last 5,000 years, Shark reasoned that this kind of rain-carved erosion would have required a much wetter climate, the kind of climate Egypt had during a more humid period at the end of the last ice age, thousands of years before Khafra. He proposed the core body of the Sphinx might be far older than its traditionally accepted date, with the head recarved later during the Old Kingdom. This is a real, published, peer-reviewed hypothesis, and it deserves to be described accurately rather than turned into a cartoon. Shark presented his findings at the Geological Society of America in 1992, and it did spark real debate. It also faced serious, substantive pushback, and viewers deserve to hear that side too, because leaving it out would be its own kind of dishonesty. Egyptologists and other geologists raised strong counter-arguments. Some pointed out that Egyptian limestone can weather in complex ways even under desert conditions, particularly through a process where water condenses inside porous rock and then evaporates, breaking down the stone from within in patterns that can mimic rainfall erosion without requiring actual sustained rain. Others noted that the deepest, most water-worn erosion appears lower in the enclosure walls, closer to where moisture would naturally pool and linger after occasional flash floods and morning dew, rather than uniformly across surfaces the way you would expect from centuries of steady rainfall. Geologist James Harrell and archaeologist Catherine Bard, among others, published detailed rebuttals arguing that the standard chronology fits the physical evidence better than an extreme redating. The scientific conversation did not end with a knockout blow either way, but the overwhelming majority of specialists in Egyptian archaeology and geology have not accepted Shark's radically older date, mainly because it would require throwing out an enormous, coherent body of independent evidence: the tombs, the causeway, the inscriptions, the broader 4th dynasty context, all of which fits together consistently. Extraordinary claims call for extraordinary evidence, and so far the water erosion hypothesis remains a minority position, respected as a genuine scientific argument, but not one that has displaced the consensus. So where does artificial intelligence actually fit into any of this? This is the part where I want to be very direct with you, because a lot of videos on this topic blur the line in a way that misleads people. When someone types a question about the Sphinx into a chatbot, whether that is Grok or any other large language model, the system does not go out and personally survey the enclosure walls with laser scanners. It does not run an independent geological analysis of limestone weathering. What it actually does is generate a response based on patterns in the text it was trained on, which includes scientific papers, but also includes documentaries, forum posts, and yes, plenty of speculative or sensationalized content about lost civilizations. If you ask a chatbot a leading question, framed to suggest the mainstream story is wrong, there is a real risk it will produce a confident-sounding answer that mirrors that framing back at you, complete with specific numbers and percentages that were not actually calculated from any real dataset, because the model is a text predictor, not a laboratory instrument. Some videos present a chatbot's fluent, authoritative tone, as if it were equivalent to a peer-reviewed discovery. It is not. A well-designed AI system, when asked honestly and given accurate context, should actually do what any good researcher does. It should tell you that the Khafra attribution is the mainstream, evidence-based position, and that Shark's rainfall hypothesis is a real but contested minority view that has not overturned that consensus. That is a less dramatic answer than the one you might see in a viral video, but it is the honest one. I think it's worth pausing here to talk about why this kind of video format, the one built around a supposedly stunned AI verdict, has become so common. It taps into something real, a very human suspicion that official institutions might be hiding something, combined with a fascination with intelligent machines that seem to see patterns we cannot. Both of those instincts are understandable. Curiosity about lost knowledge and ancient mysteries is one of the oldest and most enjoyable parts of human storytelling. But there is a difference between exploring an open question with intellectual honesty and manufacturing a false sense of scientific consensus around a chatbot's guess. When a video invents specific confidence percentages, claims a machine independently discovered a hidden chamber, or asserts that mainstream historians are being deliberately deceptive, that crosses from storytelling into misinformation, and platforms increasingly, and rightly, treat that kind of content as a violation of their misinformation and authoritative content policies. It is entirely possible to make a genuinely fascinating video about the Sphinx, about Shark's theory, about the limits and capabilities of AI, without inventing facts. That is exactly what I am trying to do with you right now. Let's talk about the head, because that detail is one of the more interesting genuine observations in this whole debate, and it deserves an accurate telling. Some researchers, including Shark, have pointed out that the head of the Sphinx does appear smaller in proportion to its body than you might expect if it were carved as a single unified design from the start. There are a few possible, non-mysterious explanations worth considering. It is possible the head was always proportioned this way due to the natural shape and quality of the bedrock outcrop the ancient sculptors had to work with, since they were not free to add stone, only to remove it, and a flaw or fracture in the rock could easily explain a more conservative head size. It is also possible the head was recarved at some point in its long history, which would not be unusual, since the Sphinx has been restored, repaired, and reworked multiple times across the millennia, including significant restoration work during the New Kingdom more than 1,000 years after Khafra, and further repairs in the Greco-Roman period and in modern times. A recarved head does not require an ancient lost civilization to explain it. Monuments get repaired. Faces erode and get restored. That is a mundane, well-documented pattern in the history of ancient Egyptian sites, not a hidden signal pointing to a vanished Ice Age culture. What about the astronomical alignment, the idea that the Sphinx stares directly at the point on the horizon where the sun rises on the equinox? This part is actually true and it is genuinely elegant. The Sphinx does face almost due east, and Old Kingdom Egyptian builders were demonstrably skilled astronomers and surveyors, capable of remarkably precise alignments, as we can see in the cardinal orientation of the pyramids themselves. But an accurate equinox alignment does not by itself require redating the monument by thousands of years. Egyptian religious and solar symbolism was deeply tied to the rising sun throughout the pharaonic period, and a 4th dynasty monument built to face the dawn fits comfortably within known Old Kingdom cosmology and temple design, no precession-based reinterpretation required. The idea that the alignment only makes sense if it points at the constellation Leo during a specific ancient epoch is a much more speculative leap, built on assumptions about how the ancient Egyptians mapped constellations that are not well supported by the astronomical texts and star charts that have actually survived from that culture. So where does that leave us, honestly? It leaves us with a real, live, scientifically interesting debate about erosion patterns on one of the most studied monuments on the planet, a debate where the mainstream position is well supported by a wide range of independent evidence, and where respected minority hypothesis continues to be discussed and tested using actual field data, not chatbot guesses. It leaves us with an AI landscape that is powerful and useful for summarizing information, but that should never be mistaken for an independent scientific instrument capable of settling a geological dispute on its own. And it leaves us with a genuinely good story, the story of scientists disagreeing in public, testing their ideas against the rock itself, changing their minds slowly as new evidence comes in, which is what real science actually looks like. It is slower and less cinematic than a machine gasping out a secret in 90 seconds, but it is real, and I think that makes it more worth your time, not less. If you want to actually go verify any of this yourself, you do not need a chatbot to do it for you. You can read Robert Shark's original papers, and his more recent books, where he lays out his case directly, in his own words, with citations. You can read the rebuttals from geologists like James Harrell, who examined the same enclosure walls and reached different conclusions. You can look at photographs and site plans of the Giza necropolis, and see for yourself how the causeway, the Valley Temple, and the pyramid complex physically connect the Sphinx to Khafra's reign. None of that requires trusting me, trusting a chatbot, or trusting anyone's word alone. It requires looking at the same evidence the scientists on both sides of this debate have been looking at for over 30 years. I will leave you with the actual open question here, the one that is honest rather than manufactured for clicks. If Robert Shark is right, and the deep erosion in that enclosure really does reflect a wetter climate rather than a mundane weathering process, what would that mean for how we date monuments elsewhere in the ancient world, and what other structures might deserve a second, careful geological look, using real fieldwork rather than speculation? That is a genuinely worthwhile question, and it does not need a single invented statistic, or a single fabricated chatbot quote to make it interesting. Tell me what you think in the comments, and if this kind of grounded, fact-checked look at ancient mysteries is something you want more of, consider subscribing, because there are plenty of these debates worth exploring the right way, with the evidence in front of us instead of a script written to make you gasp.